Hello and welcome to the Concerned Podcast. My name is Anshuman Reddy, and here with me is Couri Thomas, former mayor candidate for Peoria, warehouse manager for the
Peoria Food Bank.
Food Bank.
Oh.
Thank you. So today's subject is injustice in America towards African Americans. Couri, I would like you to start us off.
Well, thank you for having me here, Mr. Reddy.
You're welcome.
I don't want to pronounce your name wrong on air, but I really appreciate you. When we first met at the professional, young professionals meeting that we had at the 225, you just really stuck out and you reached out to me. So I really appreciate that you followed up from that day, maybe 5 months ago, 6 months ago.
Yes.
And you still followed up through reaching out to me, so I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I think for the last few, decades, injustice towards African Americans is, how do I describe the word? Become more, it's always been there since, ever. The thing is, why it's become a lot more apparent now with the murders of Laquan McDonald, Eric Gardner. Who else is there?
Freddie Gray, the St. Louis young man that was shot in St. Louis, and the 13-year-old that was shot in Ohio. So
yes, Cleveland. No, not some. I know
it might have been Cleveland, Ohio.
Yes.
Maybe so.
So what do you think causes this?
That's a really tough question. You really can't pinpoint what causes this. This is something that African Americans have been going through since the history of America, and other minorities also. But as far as slavery is concerned, I don't want to exclude that there were Native Americans that were in slavery, and there were Mexicans that had issues with slavery, and I don't know exactly. I cannot tell you an obvious answer of what caused this thing or why this is happening, but I will say it may be a power issue. It may be miscommunication, misunderstanding of our cultures, or a simple mind frame of dominance to push forward any agenda to build this society we call America. So the American society is probably, you want to build something and you just force labor and free labor. I can't say exactly why. I don't understand why or anything else. So I can't give you a clear-cut answer or why. But some issues we're having these days and why it's so in the up front now is because we have social media. We have the means as citizens to record things and have a visual on things and dialect on things, and we can see that it is happening, and there are some issues that we have. It's written in our history books. It's written and it's documented, but I don't understand. The visual side of it makes it more apparent for us, as American citizens.
So me and a few others have been researching. Well, one of the few others who've been researching this project is a man named Brandon Smith. Mm-hmm. He was one of the two people, along with a leader of the African American community in Chicago called. I'm sorry, his name's blanking on me. His name is. Let me check.
Brandon Smith.
His name William Calloway. He's currently running for state representative. Mm-hmm. They asked the Chicago Police Department to actually release the video footage of Laquan's murder.
Right.
So the thing is, how often is it that I'm asking both in Peoria and in Chicago, that that police lie about murdering African Americans, saying they had a gun or they tried to attack them,
Mm-hmm.
because they lied about Laconin having a knife,
Mm-hmm.
like
in the middle of the street.
yes. So, does that happen in? Me and my partner Mr. Smith suspect that the Chicago Police Department has been lying, because Laquan might not just be the only case of false criminalization.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we've been digging up files and analyzing records about who's been shot, whether they had a gun or not.
Mm-hmm.
Does this even happen in Peoria?
Well, that was a tragic situation. Like we were just saying earlier, the young 13-year-old in Ohio that had a toy gun or a pellet gun, and it was, it was a reaction of the police to just shoot without, any conversation or any confrontation with the perp at the time. Same thing with Chicago. I mean, he's outnumbered. I think the issue is with one person being outnumbered by officers that are professionals in their field, but not having any kind of real stand down confrontation to try to de-escalate the situation. I think is a big problem. We had a recent one in Peoria. I can't think of the man's name, but he was a young 25-year-old man, and his last name was Russell, and he had issues of mental stability, and he had a history of that. But he was gunned down by an officer here in Peoria Peoria, Illinois, and without any psychologists or psychiatrists or negotiator. He was gunned down in his front yard here in Peoria. I don't think that was in September or October. I'm not sure, but it's happening more frequent. It's happening everywhere in America right now, and I think we need to hold our professional civil servants accountable, because this is happening with police force, not doctors malpractice or firemen, or I know the police have a different objective for their job duties, and I appreciate their services, but I think we don't go to the extreme. Without going to the extreme, I should say, we don't consider the rap sheet of any perp to understand that that officers need to address issues case by case. If I have a case and my rap sheet is in their computer and they pull my name up, they should see my history. If they pull up anybody else that has a mental a problem where they need to address that issue differently, then they should, because these are situations that, in this case with Mr. Russell here in Peoria, this is a case that, you should have a psychiatrist or a negotiator there to kind of de-escalate the situation. The other issues we had where there might have been some tussle, like Minnesota, the young man was sitting in
Philando Castile.
Right, he was sitting in his car with his daughter and girlfriend in the back seat, and he mentioned that he had a weapon and he was legally, able to have that weapon. And Orlando, New Orleans, this guy had a little tussle, but he was clearly not able to, cause any damage to a police officer. And the young man in the park playing with a toy gun, and the cop pull up on him, and he just immediately starts shooting instead of trying to de-escalate a situation. This is the same thing we have in Peoria. He had a rap sheet. He did some things that were not civil, but at the same time, we need to hold our officers accountable.
I will admit something. The reason why, there, in my personal opinion, I think even despite like I know we've had a bunch of mass shootings in recent years in America,
Absolutely.
but passing gun control, extensive gun control, might have negative consequences. Like in particular the case of Tamir Rice, that was the young boy's name, Cleveland. Tamir Rice and Philando Castile. Cleveland is Ohio is an open carry state. The thing is, if that police officer, if he saw that gun, what he should have done is just walked away, because he was openly carrying a gun, which is in the rights of that state. And Philando Castile it happened in Minnesota, which is a concealed carry state, where somebody doesn't have to tell an officer that they have a weapon. Yet he told him that I do have a gun and I do have a license.
Right.
The officer, according to the rules set by the state, as well as the one set in the Second Amendment, should have stayed calm.
Absolutely.
The point is that because of that, if extensive gun control laws go into effect, African Americans are going to have it worse potentially, because it's in some way the notion of a gun carrying African American has been somewhat frightening. Because actually, here's an interesting fact most people don't realize: the very first gun control laws in the United States were passed after the Nate Turner Rebellion, because he killed a few people. He and his followers killed those who joined him. Killed a few
plantation owners and things like that.
So because of that, they forbade African Americans from owning weapons out of fear of a rebellion, and also forbade them from reading, because Nate Turner was actually a very well-read person.
Yes. And I will say that because it's state by state and not a federal law that we can, kind of bring some comfort to, as far as if it's open and it's okay to have concealed carry throughout our whole nation and not state by state, that might bring some confusion. Obviously with Nate Turner, that was one of those issues where you have to stand up for something or die for whatever the case may be. You can't just murder people because they look at you the wrong way. They might say the wrong thing. But in this society today, where education is a big issue, I think in the African American community, we're already behind because of felonies, maybe, where a felon may want to protect himself or his family, but can't legally obtain arms for his household. Or, it could be an economic issue where, it's not so much of an issue now in 2000 or whatever, but in the 90s and 80s, if you had a felon, a lot of employers didn't want to employ felons. And however the situation unfolds for African Americans, you had to pave your own way, for the lack of words, since slavery in the 50s and the 60s, when civil rights was really prominent. You still had a lot of African Americans being murdered and terrorized in the state of the United States, and terrorism wasn't.
Let me just. You can continue speaking.
Terrorism wasn't that way. Chicago had some of the highest rates of racism, and we consider that even in Mississippi or in the southern states, but it was also up north. So African Americans, and that was a reason why Martin Luther King came up and protested in Chicago, and it was a big thing, but it wasn't looked like. You can see some Caucasian men and women of racism at that time screaming and yelling at officers, and it wasn't the same when minorities would stand up for their rights and they were arrested and things like that. And I'm not trying to make this a blunt issue for racism, but when a culture and when a race is being suppressed and oppressed in a nation, you have to find, and opportunities are not really presented to equally, then it's only natural for any race or nationality to get into the means of survival. You know what I mean? Survival is doing anything that you can. People are not different. In a lot of our cultures may be different, but our means of supporting our families are the same. Our love for our children, our love for our mother, our father, our brothers and sisters, we have absolutely everything in common. But when it comes to opportunity and things like that, we can see a problem where it might cause some issues more for African Americans than any other race here in America. So I don't want to elaborate that much more over that, but African Americans have it really tough for no obvious reason than I really couldn't tell you. There's no reason for us to really have to struggle. We help stabilize this nation. We did a lot of things as slaves here in this country, and I don't understand really why it's not in this day and age that we still have racism in any form. Women, racism towards women, and racism towards immigrants, racism towards black people. Any racism is really bad right now in America, and I think our president now is not helping that situation. So
the thing is, actually, a friend told me, he's a friend from a friend I've been friends with a few years. He said a potential thing for uncivilization within the African American community is like there's a lot of families who are broken, like there's no dad or there's not dysfunction in the family.
Broken
maybe
families.
And also a lack of moral guidance within the African American community. He suggested to me like the Good Book, like Christianity as a way of guidance, because otherwise, like, you have wayward men, boys and girls going into things that they shouldn't, like drugs and gangs, murdering each other, fueling this. Could that be? How would you address that, in your opinion? Because religion is a good way of providing moral guidance and unity among people, especially community. Like, were you a preacher? Or I think somebody told me you were.
My dad is a pastor of 35 years or plus for Christianity. I think that's been the moral compass for the African American community since slavery. I mean, that's the only thing that we held on to as a culture. Just like any other culture, we have our own moral compasses that we're taught, and we're guided by that. I think the problem with racism here in America is that it was targeted to African American males. If we think about minorities, usually it's a African American male that is left out, or when we say minority, it doesn't cover you and I. It doesn't cover all minorities outside of Caucasian, and I'm not making a big deal about that, but the truth of the matter is that we leave out, and the target is really African American males.
I understand what you're getting at,
and that destructs the family. In any religion, there's your higher being, and then there's the male, and then there's the wife, and then the children, and it's in that order. So when you take one, especially the head of the family of any nationality, then you have problems. So I think that was a problem here in America, where males, the African American, especially African American males, were killed, and sacrificed, but the rest of the family was either broken up or whatever. But when that male is taken out of the way, and I'm not trying to make this a sex issue or chauvinistic at all, but that's at least biblical from my point of view.
There is something like I think you are right. African Americans do have it are basically at the bottom of the barrel. Like I come from a Indian Hindu background.
Mm-hmm.
True, I don't have the privileges of a. The thing is, though, I feel like it's not a race issue. This is just me, rather a class issue.
Mm-hmm.
Like my grandparents were poor immigrants. They didn't have a lot of money, but they worked really hard, and they were able to put my dad through medical school.
Mm-hmm.
Like he went to Northwestern. That's in. So then he was actually able to go to Harvard because of my grandparents bust their butts to get him in. The thing is, and because of them, I've been able to live a more privileged lifestyle than most people in this state.
Mm-hmm.
Like that because he's a rich doctor and we're basically millionaires. The thing is, if access to good education, having people who'll be there for you financially and morally,
Mm-hmm.
basically those are keys like to getting ahead. Also, like
Absolutely.
not all African Americans have that. Like they don't have moral guidance or the means to get an education.
Mm-hmm.
Because my friend I mentioned says that the unit that we need to work on is improving is the family, because that's what society is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need to go lower than that, in my opinion. It starts with the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe that when people start improving themselves, like realizing that it's not about themselves, improving themselves spiritually, like not doing sinful stuff, or helping others, or being for others who are in pain, or basically that's where it all starts, by looking in the mirror and realizing what's wrong with you.
Mm-hmm. That's a very, very complex issue or stance. I think I was talking. I know I was talking to someone the other day when we had our leaders, like Dr. Martin Luther King. This is prominent for us to have this conversation. He was assassinated along with a progressive person like John F. Kennedy, and his brother Robert Kennedy, and Malcolm X, and those type of leaders that brought that moral compass, that leadership for us in the African American community in America, were assassinated. We don't understand. We could not. It's hard for me to fathom where we could be at if Martin Luther King was alive and he was turning 80 or 90 year old, however old he would be right now. I think every culture, every nationality has that leader. You know what I mean? That kept going and passed the torch on. And when you basically cut the head off a snake in a culture, then and nobody picks it up, it's really hard to establish our means for moving forward. You know what I mean? But you're exactly right. That would be an excuse to a certain extent, because we have a lot of leaders here, especially for the African American community, that I want to say, we kind of look out for ourselves, individual, make sure your household is okay, and then if you have something left over, then you can pass it down in a lot of senses. But we, I think the black community can do a lot, exceptionally a lot more than what we can do to override the culture that we allow to dominate our culture. Some of the music and the perceptions that we have, and not encouraging being straight A students, so to speak. Instead of we kind of let ourselves go from fashion. I'm not putting everybody in one basket at all, but it has to be something in our own community, like you said, that stands up for a righteous lifestyle. A lifestyle that says, I'm not going this way, I'm going that way. And we don't see that as much in the northern hemisphere of America. We see that a lot in the south hemisphere of America, in the southern states. because there is pride in going to a HBCU college, and up north we don't really put as much into furthering our education. So I mean, I can't do anything but agree with you. There are some things that we have to do and fix in our own community.
I know. Sometimes our greatest enemies can be ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's also something. I'm going to go back to the police issue
Mm-hmm.
regarding that in our investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we also suspect that not only are they shooting African Americans, they're potentially leaving guns at the crime scene to make it sure to frame them to look like they were shot. Like, a lot of the cases involve people running away. Like, also, you mentioned to me a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, you mentioned, like, in Peoria, they don't use guns, but they use drugs. Mm-hmm. Is this true? Could you give more information about this?
No, I can't tell you anything directly where I know for a fact that's the issue, but and it should be in any community. When there is known drug dealers, obviously, you have to target certain situations. Drugs are a major issue in America, period. Opioids and this fentanyl and things that are causing people to overdose and die. That is like the number one killer in America now. It's not terrorism. It's not black on black crime or white on white crime or minority against the majority crime. Is opioids, it's drug overdoses, and that's a big issue. So that should be one of the main targets for our law enforcement and our government to target. Race should not be there, among that. So I can't say that they're actually people are planning drugs. But when somebody, it's like a raccoon. If your back is against the wall and you're cornered in some issues, and I think like some of these killings that has happened in the nation, you do see the perp running away. You know what I mean? Instead of standing with a shotgun pointed at police, there's not really standoffs, and they're being killed because it's an issue of the endangerment of an officer. That would be justified if it was an issue where an officer is endangered, yes. But when you got somebody that's running away, and no open and obvious danger to a civil servant, then that's when we have to take a look at what's going on. You know what I mean? It's not one of those issues where even if it was an issue where there were drugs involved, if your car is full of, it was empty and an officer threw some drugs into your car and then found that as a reason to shoot someone, that still wouldn't be, logical, I guess, in my mind. It wouldn't be justified to shoot someone. You know what I mean? It's a drug offense, and you arrest the person because it's a drug offense. You don't have to draw guns and murder someone. But when weapons are involved in any standoff with our civil services, they have to take precautions for themselves as policemen. But there are also other issues where are their lives in danger because there is a weapon involved, but there is not a weapon actually pointed at somebody. So
yes, a lot of the cases we examined on the police department's database involved usually the police officer thinking they were coming out with the gun while they were running and turning around. Mm-hmm. Besides, the thing is, like, we analyzed the DNA tests, like, they're very inconclusive. Mm-hmm. It's implied that there could be at least a few cases. I mean, I believe, like, it's actually interesting how we're able to get this information. Mm-hmm. It's through the Freedom of Information Act. Mm-hmm. I mean, basically that means, like, anything is public information, you can basically gain it. It was created, the act was passed during the Ford administration. It's a very possible, strong way of getting information for example, actual information about what actually happened. You can access it at Chicago. How often does the Peoria Police Department let you access data on police shootings? Or
I don't recall any incidents where the police actually would give you open access to what actually happened. You know what I mean? But I think the things that we see in America are because of social media and because we have high-tech phones. You know what I mean? I think there are thousands of more incidences where officers' lives were actually in danger and it was justified for their actions to protect themselves. There are probably a lot more of those incidences than there are, and I'm not taking sides, but justifying anything. But then we do have two handfuls of situations where there was a camera involved. You know what I mean? There was somebody that saw the incident and recorded it, and we saw that injustices because it was posted.
Like Freddie Gray in Charleston.
Right.
Yes. Basically, I actually did analyze the story for a school project. Mm-hmm. Basically, he was supposedly charged at him, and the officer shot. But the person who actually saw it was too scared to post it. But until he heard the next day that they actually changed the story different to what he said. Mm-hmm. So social media is a good way. But I believe the Freedom of Information Act is also another good way. Because we can actually analyze crime scene evidence, like what actually was a gun even recovered. Mm-hmm. It's I mean, basically, the tools to making our lives better are so easily like in front of us. I know that's kind of,
but generic. People don't do the due diligence like yourself. You know what I mean? That, and I think that's some accountability issues that we give away. We don't hold our government. We don't hold our representatives, state representatives, our state senator. We don't really, as a citizens in this nation, we allow so much from our government because we just simply don't do the due diligence it takes in order to hold them accountable. You know, like the things you're saying are, I can appreciate you because you're doing the due diligence behind and getting the facts and gathering the facts for yourself on part of a culture, a race, or like for African Americans, you're doing that out of your, for lack of a word, from the kindness of your own heart and your own personal consideration for people. But you know, as a mass of people, we just don't do that. We, as a culture, I can speak for Black people, we have this code, a street code almost, where you see nothing, you don't tell, you don't point out the problem. It's almost a code, and it's the sad situation that has to change. But then we have outside of our culture those white Americans, those Indian Americans, those Asian Americans, and that don't hold themselves to that.
Yes.
And you actually do the diligence, and you actually aren't afraid. I don't know if it's a neighborhood type thing because you're not there.
Most of my neighbors are Caucasian American, but you have a point. Like, we tend to cling to our own, so to speak.
We cling to our own. So we in the Black community, you kind of, it's really hard to explain. You know, it's hard to say at some point somebody's eating because somebody is doing bad. Somebody's doing wrong, but they're helping this family have a good Christmas. You know, I can't justify it. What I'm saying to you, it's not something I could justify. But the realism of the whole situation is that when there's drug issues in your community, you're destroying lives on one side, but you're also enabling another side. And this is probably the worst way I can put it, and it's very bad. The best way I can put it is that we don't invest in ourselves as a community. There's no outside community, the Black community, that invests in our community to consider the monetary, economic potential that the African American community has, but there's no one that really wants to invest in that community. And this is one of the reasons why Peoria is one of the worst places in the United States for African Americans, is because of economics. And I would like for people to understand that there is economic benefits within the black community, just like any other community. Just like any other community, that's the upside of our American GDP, is that we can be a lot richer. You know what I mean? Any other community can be a lot richer if they looked at the economic benefits of what's been suppressed in this nation forever. You know what I mean? There are so many benefits. If the city is doing bad, that's because we cut out a whole nother community where, like, Kroger's is closing. The community, if you're not hiring people, if people are not working and don't have funds and finances to be contributors to our economics in the city of Peoria, my reasonable thought would be, let's put these people to work. Let's do something that they don't have in the weaker districts of this city. So people are making money and spending money, but when we don't consider that, and that's across this nation. I'm talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of communities that are suffering, that are only African American, that aren't doing well. Our economics would, our stock, our GDP will grow that much more. It's really mind-boggling to any business person to not understand if there is wealth being on 1/3 of the country, and we're looking to be and grow our GDP, and we see that there's another quarter that's not being represented well, and not high unemployment. If you put money into that community and you establish that employment, then it alleviates issues that we have in the other 3/4 of the community throughout the nation. You know what I mean? There's less taxes. There will be less sale taxes, property taxes. You know what I mean? And at any other level, it'll be a lot less if the poor were doing better, because they'd be contributing more. Then that would alleviate a lot more for the rest of us.
So, do you believe that do you see the private sector as the solution, or the state, or a mixture of both, maybe?
It'd definitely be a mixture of both. You hit it on the head when you said a mixture of both, because the wealth is in the private sector. You know what I mean? And the state has to, not only allow some benefits from the private sector as far as lowering business taxes and things like that. The wealthy kind of can afford more, but you can't. It has to be a balance, not a straight, level, like where what's good for all of us is just to say it's 10% taxes all across the board. You know what I mean? That hurts, because the lesser has to pay 10%, but then those who are wealthy have to pay the exact same. But when you go to corporations, especially in America, that has the highest tax rates for corporations. I mean, now Trump dropped that for corporations, that's fine. But when it comes to individual tax rates, unless like they try to do with the charitable thing, where you can kind of loophole your taxes if you give to charity, you still have to have some balance with, the lesser having a little bit more, and But those that have a lot more need to, you know.
That is very understandable. A balance of free market and the state, in which like you can't have one overcoming the other, because that'll lead to problems. However, I think the biggest strategy for not just the African American community but in general, that I think we need to go back to the Enlightenment philosophies of universalism, particularly that it doesn't matter what skin color we are. It's what's on the inside that matters. And also, I believe identity politics needs to end, personally speaking, because they're basically just barriers that separate us from each other. Now, I mean, I know, like, it's understandable that you're more familiar with your own. I mean, like, that's usually the people you're raised around. However, but people gain more knowledge by interacting with others. Like, let me give you an example. Pajamas were actually originally came from India. Now everyone around the world wears them, potentially. Like, pajama itself is an Indian word. The point I'm trying to get is, by interacting with different culture, even in America, I mean, how do I describe? Can provide more benefits than it's just instead of walling ourselves off.
Social issues is the main thing we have is a problem in this country. If we celebrated each other, if we celebrated our cultures and invited our cultures to fuse together and accept one another, that's probably the biggest issue we have. I could not see this nation without pajamas or a car that's made in Japan or China, or an American car, or American style, or Japanese style, or, you know what I mean? If we don't accept one another, then we're robbing ourselves. That's how I see it. We're robbing ourselves, and to a point that, we don't, as a community for African Americans, we don't reach back after you make it to a certain level. We really don't reach back ourselves to invest in one another in our own cultures. You know, when music is an issue, when fine arts are an issue, those are the things that will bind us together. It reaches the millennia generation better than it does for anybody older than 30 or 40. The young, our hope is in our youth. They listen to all types of music, everything we bring to the table. But what we don't do as a nation is censor some of the things we do say. We do allow our artistic venues to overrun so much of our culture that doesn't really represent our culture.
Like, could you give me an example?
I won't call a female out of her name and think it's okay. You know what I mean? I don't see anything outside of as a Christian. I don't see anything outside of having two or three. And this might be a little vulgar, you know, yes. a little bit out there, okay. But I don't see myself being married to someone and 3 or 4 different females, or I don't think it's okay to say you drinking this and you popping that and you living that nightlife, and there's no moral stability in some of the music we listen to anymore. So it's really hard. I'm throwing myself under the bus right now when I talk about this, but it's the truth. You know, young people are not going to church. They're not looking for religion. They're not looking for, maybe they are, but no one's telling them that this is the direction that you need to think about for your own self and be independent, be individual. Most of the independence is to say you can do it without somebody else, and I don't believe that no one is on this earth to do anything as an individual. We are all created, I believe, to have a significant other, you know what I mean? But to say you make it by yourself and you can do it all by yourself and you don't need anyone, and you don't need a man or a woman to, you know, to do this or do that for yourself, I mean, my mind is that we all are made. Adam wasn't made by himself. And when God, in my religion, God saw Adam was alone, he created a woman for a help.
Basically took one of his ribs out and made Eve with.
So now we have women in that platform to say women rule the world and we don't need no man to do nothing for us, and that goes against what the foundations, man and woman was, purpose for. So I kind of got off a little basis with it, but we kind of get to the individual side of it where we don't need one another, and socially we need each other. We need each other to have a more colorful life. I need what you have. Your life is richer because of what I have. Both of our lives are better because we can experience what they have and what the other have. Our lives are much better for it. So socialism is a big factor that's been minimized.
Like interacting with each other, because socialism,
accepting each other.
Yes. So the thing is, how do I describe this? In some ways, that's what you talked about. I know that I'm kind of detracting from the subject, digging into philosophy, but there was once a existentialist philosopher named Albert Camus from France. He believed that basically humans were destined to
You're a very knowledgeable person. You know that, right?
Why, thank you. The thing is, he believed that we have to deal with something called the absurd, that the inability of us to find complete meaning in life. Mm-hmm. The thing is, when people find the absurd, realize the absurdity of life, they go back to going back to normal and forgetting about it. Mm-hmm. B, they commit suicide. Either way, that means like actually taking their life, or B, just blindly accepting as something without thought. Albert Camus also at first believed this to be a religion, but also about science, like politics, like indulging in sensual pleasure, or just believing science absolutely. Or C, rebelling against this universe that's hostile to ours, like standing up for each other. I believe that it's C that he really believed in, like standing up for the dignity of all man in a way that's respectful and dignified. Sort of universalism that sees past religion, race. Because basically he realized that we all have to deal with our own inner demons, and our own problems, and that we can only do this by bonding with one another, because we all have to deal with the same struggles.
Yep. Absurd. That for me to say something is absurd to me, but and not understanding what is significant to somebody else. That's a barrier that whatever evil would try to put a barrier between me and you. You know what I mean? If it's important to you, I can't say that's absurd. What is human for me to do is to try to listen and understand what a person is talking about, or where their heart is, or where they are emotionally. But then to stand strong and say, "Oh, that's absurd. You're wrong. That don't make sense." Now you're pushing somebody to another level that they're more isolated.
Yes.
In a sense. So there should not be anything in this world and in nature that's absurd. I think that is what walls us off from one another. And that the simple lesson from that I can remember is from a teacher telling you there is not any bad question. It's only bad because you don't ask the question. You know what I mean? You could see 30 young people in the classroom. 20 may understand what the teacher is saying. 5 may say, act like they understand, but they really don't understand. 4 of them may sit there and say, I absolutely don't understand. And then you got that one person that say, you know what did that mean? And then clarity comes for all the other 29 plus the one. You know what I mean? Now everybody has a better clarity of what actually was being taught in that classroom. So socially, we think of each other as absurd, like what you think, what the black community is going through, what the white community is going through, what the Asian community, Indian community is going through, is absurd because you simply don't understand, the issues of politics, of religion, of public education towards private education, economic status. It's hard to put yourself in those shoes if you think as, oh, well, they're acting in a certain way and that's absurd. That's I can't understand that, so I won't try to. I believe that if they really wanted better, they would, do better, or think that, well, people don't in their everyday lives don't necessarily consider those things to finish a GED. Their immediate circumstance is their number one priority. People would like to get to that area. People would like to say, it's so good right now that I have time and opportunity that's presented to me and encouraging to me through church or through a teacher or through a mentor, that now I can say, I can put this aside for a while and I can pursue this. And patience is a virtue. And in a lifestyle right now, in our lifestyle, to be patient is very hard. Everything is moving at the speed of light. You can send an email across the world. So some of these things it's hard for us to even preach patience and to think that something is not relevant or absurd because how things are moving, and education and knowledge and technology and things like that are so fast moving. It's absurd when you think that you have the tools right in front of you, but you really don't have it. You can't afford internet. You can't afford so many things. But if you have it, you kind of think, well, you can easily do this. But when you don't have certain things, you kind of, you attend to your own situation.
It actually reminds me of a phrase saying from Sir Thomas Paine. He was a English writer. He really influenced the founding fathers. Here's his saying: "What we esteem too lightly, we esteem too lightly what we attain too cheaply. It's only in rarity that we find value."
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
The thing is, not just
because everything comes fast, and it's like when you get your first car or when you first got your license. It's not when you first bought your first car. When you got your license and your parents let you use their car to do anything you want to do, you didn't worry about gas. You didn't worry about the insurance. You didn't worry when you hit a curb and bust a tire. But when you bought your own car, then you start worrying about your tires, oil changes, putting gas in your own car, and insurance. So absolutely, that's a essence of life there, of maturity, I think.
Yes. There is one issue I would like to address. The thing is, a lot of people are being hostile towards President Trump for all the bad things that happen in America. I am by no means a Trump supporter, but however, I'm not as hostile to most Trump supporters the most anti-Trump people. The point I'm trying to make is, the way I see it is, most people think Trump is the source of what, a lot of people think of Trump as like a source of either what's wrong in America, for minorities, for LGBT people. But the thing is, it's been like this for a while. Mm-hmm. It's
turn a blind eye to it.
I wouldn't say that. It's so much easier to blame others for what's wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, we always tend to leech onto a certain thing whenever we hate to blame everything. Like, let me give you this. be very dangerous. Like in the aftermath of World War One, because of economic recession and everything, the Germans were very hostile towards Jewish people because they blamed them for like taking advantage or because they were bankers or other things. So they used that to like basically. You could argue that the Holocaust happened because of that. Like even if it wasn't Hitler who would have done it, it would have been someone else. I mean, that feeling of hostility, of blaming others or looking down on others. That's like, here's one thing there's one problem I do have. A lot of people don't like to acknowledge that there are African Americans who support Trump or they're conservative African Americans. Like, the point I'm trying to make is that I believe in diversity. But at the same time, that must include diversity of thought, or people who believe or see the world differently than you do. Like, I believe, this is just me, I believe Christians who are like, say homosexuality is a sin. I mean, that's in the Bible itself, like Leviticus, I forget which verse. Thou shalt not lay like with a man like you lay with a woman. I'm sorry for mispronouncing the Bible verse.
No, it's okay.
The thing is, there are people, that is a thing of Christianity, but if you do say that out loud in social life, that you are going to get ostracized. Or people, if you're in a southern town and you say like President Trump's an idiot, you're also going to ostracize. The thing is, in order to truly appreciate diversity of thought, we need to look at what's both on the outside and the inside. Like, there's no just like one white race or black race or that. It's a different fractions. Like, let me explain. India is in one homogenous culture. Each state has its own history. Like, India was divided into for centuries was divided into different kingdoms and empires, like our own languages, our own like I'm relating back to the like you could, like, people on the east and west coast can see quote unquote middle America as flyover country or a completely different country, or people in the Rust Belt can see like New York City or Los Angeles as beds of sin and vice. The point I'm trying to make is, it's so, like I said, it's so easy to judge other people rather than to go in and understand them.
Absolutely. Like you were saying, and even biblically, we were all one people. And then you had the Tower of Babel that we all try to build. When we come together, we could do anything impossible. God said it himself from the Christianity point. We could do anything if we was coming together. So he had to disperse us throughout this world.
Humanity became arrogant.
You know, we got really arrogant, and we're getting to that point again. And but we our togetherness, what God would like us to see is far in between.
A humbleness.
There's no humility nowadays, and I think with President Trump, that's what he's displaying. And because even those who support him and those who don't support him, I think his ratings would go up a lot more if he had humility. You know, he does say thank you, blah blah blah, but the next word coming out of his mouth is divisive. And as a Democrat or independent, I'm more independent. Whatever makes best policy, that's what I'm standing for. I'm not Republican or Democrat. I'm independent, and progressive, you know. And I do see some of the things he say are true, you know what I mean. But we can't, if we hold on to so much of what he says and what he stands for and how he says it, then we're neglecting what America stands for. You know, we are a melting pot. That's always the way it's been. I don't think anybody ever chose to come to America by their own free will, but African Americans. You know what I mean?
Yes.
We were brought here in chains. We're not going to leave. Even a smart person, African American, after all these hundreds of years of being here, or in the last 100 years, that we don't see a better opportunity in Africa, in any other country in that continent, that we could have as much freedom. I think America represents immigration throughout the whole world. But let's look at the what has happened in history from the continents of Africa and what's really the richest there. You know what I mean? The whole world is rich because of basically one continent. You know what I mean? It's not, if we all have some people say every nationality or every race has really originated from Africa. I don't know if you agree with that, but if that's true, we all come from one place, you know what I mean, as one people. We go to other parts of this world and blah, blah, blah. Oil, fossils, diamonds, gold, silver, platinum is really the wealth there. People were taken. Oil is taken. Diamond, blah, blah, blah. Recently, Donald Trump said the S-hole, the shithole from these areas. I apologize for using that vulgar language.
He did say that.
So, and then I had a conversation with a guy at a restaurant yesterday. I said, what if this place, if Africa obtained all the wealth that they had in their own ground, you know what I mean? Would it be called that then? The other nation, a lot of our nations and countries in our world is really benefiting off of the wealth of one continent for the most part.
True. That is the thing is about the shithole comment. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, those people are coming from there to here because, well, I'm not criticizing Venezuela, but they have not been up to the standards they should be. Mm-hmm. Even though they just called them as a socialist government that's made for the people. Mm-hmm. There's still starvation there. But still people want to come here for that reason. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I believe that fragmenting in different communities and fighting ourselves isn't the right way. I'm not saying that everyone needs to become one homogenous culture. Mm-hmm. It's just that instead of dividing multiculturalism, I propose integration. I prefer to use integration rather than conform, because integration is willing. Conform is more of doing something reluctantly. Basically, learning English, interacting with other cultures, learning about other cultures, understanding who they are as people, is bringing unique strengths. Because the reason why I think multiculturalism, I'm not against people who believe in multiculturalism. It is a little bit of a problem in European countries, where other communities live in separate areas that are completely shut off from one another. Mm-hmm. By creating one culture that unites all of us and keeps us strong is the right way to go. The universalism I talk about. Mm-hmm. There's one thing I quoted. Basically, I'm sorry for where was it?
No, you're absolutely right.
In 1963, Martin Luther King also drew on Jefferson's words. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every African American was an heir. The note was a promise that all men, yes, black as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise and live the meaning of this creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
A mixture of freedom and equality. Because I believe that freedom and equality in themselves must find balance in one another. Mm-hmm. Complete freedom would result in anarchy. Everyone be equal result in no progress or no future.
Mm-hmm. We have to have government.
Yes. But
we also, it's just the accountability that we should hold to our government. It's like a man's word should be his bond. If you say something, if something is written as a creed for a nation, especially, yes, we have our rights. We have it's written. Every man is created equally, but do we as a society hold each other to that right? You know what I mean? We failed as humans, and any human that thinks they're dominant of any other human and don't hold themselves to that word, then the masses of humanity should stand up. We don't stand up, like we were talking a little earlier. We don't hold our, and that's the thing about government. We have to, otherwise we would have anarchy, and that's the reason biblically God has established a government power. Any religion has established that government, power to have order in everything. You know what I mean? Or else we would the commandments, the 10 Commandments, or after that, the grace and mercy that Christ represented. But as humans, we don't hold ourselves to our word, and it has been diluted over these centuries. And here in America, if you look at some of the other countries, they absolutely hold themselves accountable. You know what I mean? You have some Arab countries where they would basically murder someone or cut off a hand if they stole something, or if they did something against the rules and that's their religion, then they hold them to it.
Thing is, however, such a system would be horrible and dehumanizing, Absolutely. To the extent, that's why I'm too cynical. I'm skeptical towards too much government in our lives, where it's to the point where it chokes everything. Mm-hmm. I'm opposed to the welfare state and the nanny state, where we're totally dependent on the state mm-hmm. instead of standing on our own 2 feet. Yet, mm-hmm. too relying on the free market can be just as problematic. Mm-hmm. So I believe, like I said, balance, trying to understand ourselves and others, and trying to grow as people is the key solution. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's been enough for tonight. Thank you for watching and listening to this podcast. Good night. And see you next time.